and our dear friend, our brother Scott Ritter is here with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let me so please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. And let me start, Scott, with the latest comments on the part of the Marco Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States. He says that we won't make any nuclear deal with Iran that doesn't include limiting the range of their ballistic missiles, so they can no longer threaten Israel. If I don't know how can we consider the policies on the part of Marco Rubio, because he was somehow talking the same way when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. He was always the noise in the background. You know, the negotiations are somehow they're trying to do something in terms of negotiating to each other, negotiate to do the negotiations between the Iran and the United States. But when you see the Secretary of State of the United States talking this way, somehow he's blocking everything before even being started.
Yeah. Look, Iran exists today. The Islamic Republic survives today because of its ballistic missile program, and because specifically that ballistic missile program can reach Israel. So what Marco Rubio is saying is commit suicide. Our conditions are you commit suicide, because we know 100% that if Iran followed through and limited the range of its missiles so they couldn't strike Israel, Israel would destroy Iran without fear of retaliation. So it's a non-starter. It's stupid. I'm in no position to advise the Iranian government on anything, nor would I. I'm not an agent of Iran. But when you take a look at what's happening here in the United States, someone needs to remind Marco Rubio that your boss wanted to bomb Iran, assembling the greatest armada in the world, the big stuff, really big stuff, and then he didn't. Why, Marco? You're the national security advisor, so you can get into domestic politics, Marco Rubio. You're not just Secretary of State. And you know why. Because the United States can't deliver the knockout blow against Iran. And Iran would be able to deliver perhaps a knockout blow against Israel and do significant damage to the United States. So it's the United States that is seeking out these negotiations. Iran's not crawling to America. Now, I believe that the Iranians are smart enough to know that, you need to leave the window open. But Rubio just shut the window, just shut the door. There's no space here. Marco Rubio doesn't make the decisions in Washington. This is a politically driven sequence of events that is precipitated not by what's happening in the region, but what's happening at home. You see, this president is in danger of terminating his presidency prematurely. There are midterm elections in November, and there is a good chance, because of the stupidity of his policies regarding, illegal immigrants. He got elected largely on this policy, and that people aren't against, deporting illegal immigrants, especially those with a criminal record. That's a good thing. But to invade American cities for purposes other than deportation, to use DHS as an occupation army to intimidate Democratic-leaning cities, to violate American constitutional rights because of quotas that are generated, to artificially, boost deportation numbers. There's a backlash, and America's just not putting up with it. And so Trump has been put on notice. You're going to lose the midterms. You're going to lose the House. And when you lose the House, you're going to be impeached every day of the week for the rest of your presidency. And that's the end of your presidency. Now, imagine that you take that sentiment, which he's struggling to overcome right now, to soften his policies, to have put a different face, a different spin on this. You couple that with the man who said, I'm not a war president, I'm a peace president. I want to disentangle America from, the trap of the Middle East, where we get stuck in generations-long conflicts that cost trillions of dollars and achieve nothing but dead Americans. He's getting ready to get us involved in just that, because there will be no knockout blow against Iran. Now, we can hurt Iran. Of course we can hurt Iran. But Iran can hurt us too. And a threshold of pain that has been established by some in Iran is 500 dead Americans. That basically say, if this happens, we need to kill 500 Americans. And that'll be a threshold of pain that Donald Trump and America won't tolerate. Well, somebody who used to wear the uniform of the United States Marines and treasures those men and women who serve us, I don't want to see 500 dead Americans, especially in a war of choice. Iran isn't attacking us. Iran isn't threatening us. This is a war of choice. This is a war of politics, playing stupid games. This is a war that's designed to appease Israel. But I want to remind everybody that it was Israel at the end of the 12-day war that picked up the phone and called Donald Trump and pleaded for him to end the war because Iranian missiles couldn't be shot down and were starting to hit targets that were really painful to Israel. Nothing's changed in that equation. Nothing. So Marco Rubio can say whatever he wants. It's irrelevant. This president isn't going to bomb Iran because it's the end of his presidency. And so Iran should go forward. Look, I think Iran, should have flexibility on the nuclear program. That's my personal opinion. I'm not saying give it up. I'm just saying be realistic. If you can get the United States to agree to a nuclear program, and forget Marco Rubio, nuclear program means nuclear program, not ballistic missiles. I mean, the way you deal with missiles is simple. If I were the Iranians, I'd say, yep, you want to talk about that? Sure. Then everybody's capabilities. When you eliminate Israel's ability to strike Iran, we can eliminate our ability to strike Israel. That's plain and simple. And until that happens, we don't want to talk about it because the last time I checked, we didn't initiate conflict with Israel. Israel initiated conflict with us, and everything we did was defensive in nature. But the Iranians don't want to shut the door in the face of the United States because now you create a political problem. So you have one political problem, which is the president can't explain to the American people why he would be bombing Iran. Because the whole fiction of you're slaughtering 60,000 Iranians in the streets, that's been exposed as fiction and won't survive any scrutiny. Iran's not threatening us, not attacking us, none of that. But if Iran says we refuse to talk about nuclear issues at all, it shuts the door. Remember what happened last time we manufactured a case about weapons of mass destruction? And we went to war against Iraq. Then you give the president justification that could theoretically rally the American people around. I don't think it would, but it changes the political equation domestically. This is all about domestic American politics. This is all about the midterms and how Donald Trump positions himself to be successful in the midterm elections so his presidency can survive. A war with Iran, unprovoked war of aggression, a war of choice, would be disastrous for this president because he won't win. He is a bully. He expects to intimidate people into, capitulating shortly to either agree to an agreement or to give America what they want. When people stand up and say we're ready to fight, especially a nation like Iran that has proven capabilities, Trump doesn't want that fight because he doesn't want to pay the price. He can't pay the price. He's a moral and, I believe, physical coward. This is about domestic American politics. And as long as every action Iran takes keeps that in mind, I think they'll be okay. They have to play to the American mob. They have to convince the mob that Iran's not a target worthy of the death of any Americans.
Do you think that if Donald Trump, let's assume, decides to talk and the negotiations somehow progress, do you think that Israel, as they put out yesterday and the day before, that they're going to attack Iran unilaterally? It doesn't matter if the United States is there to attack Iran.
Why would they? Again, Israel's the one that told Donald Trump, don't bomb Iran unless you can deliver the knockout blow. Israel can't deliver the knockout blow. They did a surprise attack in June, and they didn't deliver the knockout blow, and they paid the price. So this is just posturing on the part of Israel. Israel's not going to unilaterally attack Iran because Israel will have Tel Aviv turned upside down. I mean, the Iranians have been preparing, I believe, for this very eventuality. Nothing's going to take them by surprise. The last time they allowed their entire country to go to sleep thinking they were in peace was the night that Israel attacked them and eviscerated their military leadership. That's not going to happen again. And Iran's capabilities are improving. So this is just bluster on the part of Israel. Again, if I were Iran, I would just ignore it. Or just put a statement out that if Israel attacks, we destroy Israel. It's the end of story. There won't be any, taking it nice on you this time. Our first targets will be all of your critical infrastructure. The lights will go out and never come back on. And we will be destroying targets in Israel with World War II type acceptance of collateral damage, meaning the day of us deliberately avoiding civilian casualties is over. This is an existential fight against Israel. You killed, 900 Iranians in their bombing attack in the 12-day war? 900 Iranians, civilians, were killed by the Israelis. Just tell the Israelis the gloves are coming off. You're not coming in, softly. You're coming in with the hammer. And the hammer will turn Tel Aviv upside down. Tel Aviv will look like Gaza by the time you're done. Just let the Israelis know that that's what's at stake here. And they'll shut up. They'll back. They won't shut up. The Israelis never shut up, but they'll back off. It was Israel that begged for the ceasefire in June. Israel begged, and Israel's telling Trump, don't attack unless you can knock them out. So what is Israel saying now? They want to restart a war that they lost, that they suddenly have ballistic missile defense capabilities that could solve the Iranian missile problem. They don't. It's just political posturing on the part of Israel, because Netanyahu is in a political bind at home, and he can't be seen as being weak in the face of Iran's refusal to yield to American demands.
You know what's going on here in Iran? You see the intelligence, the military, they're not optimistic about negotiations with the United States at all. Whatever the government is trying to say that we may talk, we have to talk with the United States, but they say, oh, you can do whatever you want to do, but we are prepared to whatever the worst case scenario. If the United States decide Israel wants to attack us, we are prepared to respond immediately. And Scott, when you see, yesterday we had the Iranian drones being shot down by the American aircraft carrier, because they said that it's getting close, it's moving directly toward the aircraft carrier. Somehow, when the dynamics of these sort of interactions, when everything's so much messy and in some sort of chaos, any mistake can bring a new war, a new escalation. That's the reason I'm not happy with this situation. I personally am not happy. I don't want any sort of war between the United States and Iran. And that's why I think I somehow understand what the military and the intelligence is talking about. And on the other hand, I totally understand the position of the government in terms of negotiating with the United States.
But why do you have to have either or? Why can't you do both?
Yeah.
I mean, what the government is saying is the United States right now politically can't attack us, because the political consequences of that attack will be disastrous for the president. What we don't want to do, though, is give him a political excuse to attack us. And the way you avoid that is by engaging in negotiations. But at the same time, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, won't get fooled again. You're not going to go to sleep. And your military needs to be on a hair trigger alert. Your intelligence services need to be looking for signs of an attack, not to be lulled into a false sense of complacency. I mean, that's what happened to Iran last time. With all due respect to the Iranian government, you believed the United States. And you got lulled into a false sense of complacency. You thought you were on a negotiation path, and it was a setup the entire time. So now I think the intelligence people have to be always assuming that it's a setup. It's a setup. You're being set up. And your military has to be prepared to, retaliate with a knockout blow, the moment attack. No incremental attack, none of this. That's playing the other side's game. When the other side, puts on the gloves and throws the punch, knock them out. That's how they have to behave. But understand that Iran's not going to win a conflict with the United States. You're not going to win. The United States isn't going to win. You're going to hurt America in the cause. But the United States can do levels of damage that Iran doesn't want to experience. Iran saw what happens with precision-guided munitions. I believe one of the reasons why Iran agreed to the conflict termination at the end of 2022 because Iran was hurt. Iran was hurting. No leadership wants to subject their people to that kind of pain. And so while you're prepared for a war, responsible leadership has to also look for an off-ramp. And I think that's what the negotiations provide. Again, negotiation doesn't mean surrender. I mean, just because Marco Rubio says something doesn't mean that's what it's going to be. Again, from my perspective, the Iranians have a lot of latitude here just to tell Rubio to shut up and pound sand. Because, if Rubio doesn't want peace, then you should have bombed us yesterday. But you didn't bomb us yesterday. And there's a reason why you didn't bomb us yesterday, because you can't bomb us and win. And you're not ready to pay the price. And I would if I were the Iranians, I'd be that blunt. Marco Rubio, you're not ready to pay the price of a war. So quit talking the language of war and start talking the language of peace. We want peace. We want to find a way to it. But we know and you know that if we gave up our ballistic missiles, you'd bomb us the next day. That's just the way it is, Marco. We know it. You know it. You're a liar. Israel's a liar. We don't trust you, but we don't want a war. So we'll negotiate. You want to talk about the nuclear program? We'll talk about the nuclear program. But ballistic missiles? Nah. It's the thing that keeps us alive. Why did the Abraham Lincoln shoot down a drone? Ask yourself that question. Because they're scared. They're scared to death. They are out there 800 kilometers off the coast of Iran, moving around, trying to stay quiet, not letting the Iranians know where they are, because if they ever do launch, what they fear is that Iran will fire a salvo of hypersonic missiles with maneuvering warheads with precision-guided capability that will sink the Abraham Lincoln. And so they're trying to stay hidden. They didn't shoot down that drone because America's being aggressive. They shot down that drone because they were panicked, because that drone got too close. That drone was going to find out where the Abraham Lincoln was. They don't want the Iranians to know where the Abraham Lincoln is because they're scared because they know what will happen. The carrier battle group is a legacy weapons system that no longer has operational viability against a modern opponent. It's the same fear they have with the Chinese. If we ever end up in a shooting war with China over Taiwan, I can guarantee you that aircraft carriers are going to be way the hell out there because they can't come in close because they'll get sunk. If there's ever a shooting war with Russia, aircraft carriers will be way the hell out there because you get too close, they're going to get sunk. They're not survivable in the modern environment against an enemy equipped with area denial weapons. And that's, of course, what Iran has. So I think, Iran, you don't want to rub it in America's face. Like I said, you have to be very careful not to create the political conditions inside the United States where the president can justify a military strike against Iran. An over-aggressive Iran, remember, don't expect the American people to be suddenly overcome with common sense. To wake up and go, well, we need to be geopolitically responsible here, and we have to talk about parity and mutual benefit and, mutual spheres of influence and how we interact and all that. No, the American public's all about, America first. We're the biggest, baddest person in the world. And you rub it in our face, next thing you know, you got to fight. I don't think Iran wants a fight. So negotiations are a good way to avoid a fight. But Iran has a whole bunch of negotiating leverage. Number first and foremost of which is Donald Trump can't bomb Iran without losing the midterm election. That's what the conditions right today dictate. If he bombs Iran, he loses the midterm election, and he could lose the Senate, which means he could be convicted, and then he goes to jail. That's where we're at. I'm sorry to say, Iran, your future depends upon the political viability of a failed president. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles. That's the world that we live in. Iran should understand this and should adjust its policies accordingly.
How do you see the way that Netanyahu is trying to convince or somehow put pressure on Donald Trump, and how
he's not? Nima, I just said, listen to what I'm saying. Israel will not attack Iran because Israel can't attack Iran. The United States will not attack Iran because the United States can't attack Iran. When I say can't, they can't survive the consequences of attacking Iran. So what pressure is Netanyahu putting on the American president? None. He is posturing for domestic political audience. He's said Iran must go, Iran must go. But if Iran must go, then why did you stop the 12-day war? Because you can't make Iran disappear. If Iran must go, why did you stop Trump from attacking earlier when there were the demonstrations in the streets? Because you knew it wasn't a knockout blow and you'd be taken off the face of the earth. Netanyahu's not pressuring Trump to attack Iran. He's pressuring Trump not to attack Iran, and that's a political problem for Netanyahu. So he has to posture publicly to make people think he's a tough guy, a bad guy, that any attack that did not happen against Iran is because the Americans don't want to do it. He's not going to tell people the truth, that he's scared to death of the consequences of hitting Iran and not taking out the leadership. From the Israeli perspective, if you can't knock Iran out in 3 to 5 days, and knockout means that the regime is gone. If you can't do that, then don't do it. Don't strike the king unless you can kill the king. And right now, neither Israel nor the United States can kill the king. So Netanyahu's not putting pressure on Trump to do anything other than don't bomb Iran, because he can't survive that because of the missiles. That's why Rubio wants the missiles to go away. I mean, the missiles are what saved Iran.
You know, my point is that the best case scenario for Israel would be a war between Iran and the United States, and Israel being at the margins of the war, not being that much involved in the war. That's the best case scenario.
That's not going to happen. The Iranians are too smart. They said, correct me if I'm wrong, but the statement is, if America bombs us, we hit Israel with everything we have, because we treat Israel as an extension of America. We don't separate the two. If Israel attacks us, we hit the American bases, because Israel and America are the same. Our target deck will not change. If you want a war with us, we'll bomb the same targets regardless of who starts the war. That's just the truth. That's what the Iranians have said. And I believe them. I believe them. I believe that if the United States bombed Iran, Tel Aviv would be turned upside down that night. So there's no best case scenario for Israel. There's no, Israel's in an existential crisis of its own making by defining Iran as the greatest threat in the world to Israel, and therefore a threat that needs to be taken out. They've basically allowed for only one solution that's politically acceptable, but that's a solution they can't execute, they can't achieve. So they have a political problem. Donald Trump is fortunate that he hasn't painted Iran into that corner yet. Iran right now is purely a nuclear problem. Marco Rubio is trying to make it a ballistic missile problem. But I think that the more the Iranians just say, look, we don't want a war. But the only reason why we're here today is because we have these missiles that you're scared of, and we're not giving them up. If you want us to give them up, you have to not only pull all your aircraft carriers away. Here's the deal. This is what I would tell them. We'll take our missiles off of frontline status and put them in storage spaces. You take your aircraft carriers and put them into port. And then as you decommission your aircraft carriers, we'll decommission our missiles. Meanwhile, we want inspectors on the ground in Israel making sure that all of their airplanes have been throttled down so they can't fly long distances. We don't want any Israeli aircraft that can reach Iran. And what reach Iran means they can't fly into Iraq and fire their standoff missiles. So you eliminate Israel's long-range strike capability verifiably. You eliminate your ability to, and then we'll get rid of the missiles. Fair's fair, right? Because anything else is just setting Iran up to be destroyed. The only reason why Iran exists today is because of its long-range ballistic missile program. That's it. That's the only reason. And to give it up and not insist on other changes is suicide.
The other point, in the other alternative in the calculation, in the equation that we have here in the West Asia, is the assessment on the part of the Arab states together with Turkey. And they were trying to somehow make some sort of bridge between the United States and Iran to bring them together. And how did you find their sort of behavior in that direction? Do you think that they're honest in the way that they're behaving? Do you think that because after all, nobody, in my opinion, nobody would be happy about any new escalation in the Middle East, in the West Asia, between the United States and Iran, because that would be totally a devastation for the whole region. It's not just about Iran and the United States. The whole region would somehow, be somehow gets devastated by the war, by the economy of the war, the consequences of the war, the escalation, the attacks, and all of that. Do you think that they understand, they grasp that sort the reality of a new war in the Middle East? That's why they're trying to do this?
There's no doubt that if you're an oil-producing country, you understand the consequences of an American-Israeli attack on Iran that expands into striking Iranian energy infrastructure. Iran then will destroy Azerbaijani oil production capability, Saudi Arabian oil production capability, Kuwaiti oil production capability. They'll probably destroy UAE, anybody, everybody. They will create an energy crisis. And so you have to weigh that in mind. The Saudis, they're trying to please everybody. We know that the Saudis have made a concerted diplomatic effort to reach out to Iran and that there's been high-level contacts, and they are looking to create stability, regional stability. We also know that Saudi Arabia at this point in time is dependent upon America for its security. They haven't been able to divorce themselves. This is why Saudi Arabia is looking for not just the bilateral security agreement with Pakistan, which was a response to the Israeli attack on Qatar, but now they're possibly looking to extend it to Turkey as well. And again, that's to create a very strong foundation to contain Israel. Israel is the problem and America is the supporter of Israel. So Saudi Arabia is torn right now. So I think it's very possible, because I've read things. You got to be careful what you read because there's a whole bunch of misinformation being put out there. But, I've read that the Saudis are encouraging the United States to attack. I also know that Saudi Arabia is continuing to provide bases for American military aircraft. They say that they won't allow their bases to be used, but they've lied before. And if it comes to, again, a situation where the United States says this is the knockout blow, meaning we're going in for the kill, I think Saudi Arabia at this juncture would say, okay, do it. Use our bases, do it, but kill them, kill them, kill them. Do not let them survive. And you have to kill them quick, because otherwise they're going to take out our oil fields. And that's bad news for us. So I think there's that sentiment in Saudi Arabia and maybe in other nations as well. Turkey's interesting. The Zanzibar corridor. You remember that? I mean, this was a big crisis between Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Iran. And Iran said, if you build the Zanzibar corridor, we're not sitting by idly. This could be about war and everything. And Tom Barak was in there pushing this thing. It was Trump's corridor, Trump's peace corridor. Trump deserves the Peace Prize because of the peace corridor and the Zanzibar. No one's talking about it anymore. No one's talking. Why? There's some interesting things happening right now. In Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in Abkhazia, the breakaway republic, the Russians are working really hard to get that rail line open. Why? Well, because it goes from, if you open up that rail line, you've got direct connectivity from St. Petersburg, the Far East, all the rail lines come in, and now you have a rail line that doesn't go through Baku and then have to use the Caspian Sea. You have a rail line that comes down through Georgia into Armenia and into Iran. And suddenly you can put a trainload of goods in St. Petersburg and bring it all the way down the Chabahar. And then it goes into the Indian Ocean. Chinese goods can do the same thing. And Turkey's okay with this now. See, Turkey was looking for this corridor that busts through Armenia and got into Azerbaijan to get into Central Asia. But Turkey's not playing that game anymore. Why? Israel. And I think Turkey's now recognizing that there's a greater threat from Israel and from the United States, pressuring Arab states into this, Abraham Accord type arrangement. Israel has declared Turkey, some Israelis have declared Turkey to be a greater strategic threat to Israel than Iran. And so Turkey's changing its posture a little bit. And it's just fascinating to watch. Watching the Zanzibar corridor disappear is a geopolitical problem, because there was a while back, this, we talked about this before, where this was going to be a war. Iran actually was sending troops up to the border with Azerbaijan. No one's talking about it because it doesn't exist. No one's trying to make it happen. They're talking, instead of going, west to east, it's north to south. And the Russians are doing things in Abkhazia right now that nobody's talking about. It's well below the radar, but they are working with the Abkhazians and the Georgians to get that rail line open, because that's a game changer. And I think the fact that Turkey is now facilitating this speaks volumes about where Turkey stands in terms of the geopolitics of the region. Turkey's not an enemy of Iran. Turkey's a friend of Iran. They may compete on certain things, but Turkey is a friend of Iran. And I think, Turkey is adjusting its geopolitical vision to incorporate the possibility of friendship with Iran. And that's a good thing. I think it plays to Iran's benefit. So, we'll see. You got to correct me if I'm wrong. The negotiations, were they supposed to be in Turkey first, and then they were talking about moving them, or were they supposed to be somewhere else and then move to Turkey?
No, it was supposed to be in Turkey, in Istanbul. Then they move it to Muscat in Oman.
Yeah.
It's going to be in Oman. And if I'm not mistaken, they're going to talk to each other on Friday. I don't know if it's going to be direct talk. Even they're talking about directly talking to each other. Steve Witkoff together with, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi. And I think, Scott, what has happened to Iran, I've been outside of Iran for more than 12 years, and then I came back and see what was happening with this internal, manipulation from the outside. They were trying to, manipulate everything here. And, the outcome of what has happened in the last, few months, you see how Iran is getting closer to Russia. When you see the head of the Security Council of Iran, which literally is the one of the closest persons to the supreme leader of Iran, going to Russia, talking with Russia.
Shamkhani, right?
Yeah. It's Ali Larijani.
Larijani, but Shamkhani was.
Shamkhani is one of the military experts, and he has a lot of expertise because he was in the war in Iraq, and he's part of that council that
right.
One of the advisors to the supreme leader
going to Moscow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But Ali Larijani, he's the head of the Security Council, and he's so much important. He's one of the most important characters right now. And what's funny, he was not in this position before the war breaking out between Iran, and he came and he changed. He has a lot of power to be.
But what's curious, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was barred from running for president.
Yeah.
in the last election, because
exactly.
Yeah,
he was.
And so here's a man who, this just shows you the stupidity of the West. That you have a situation in Iran where the moderates are prevailing, and they're starting to squeeze out some of the old school conservatives and everything. And again, if I were in the CIA running the Iran Mission Center, I think we closed it, but whatever, I'd be telling the president, let this happen. Just hands off. Let this happen naturally. we're getting the changes in Iran that we want to get. We don't have to go to war. And once we get political leadership change, we can come in with the carrot, the lifting of the sanctions, and the military will be weakened. We can then work on getting the ranges of the missiles down. We can get everything we want by letting Iran do this on their own. Oh, we're going to bomb them. Oh, good. You bombed them. And Ali Larijani, who was banned from running for president, is now one of the most powerful people in Iran, one of the most influential people. Now, I've never met the man, but I've studied him. He's a rational actor. He's not an irresponsible actor. He's a rational actor, but I wouldn't call him moderate or liberal. Isn't his brother some big official in the judiciary?
Yeah, exactly. His brother was one of the, and he is, he's not liberal at all, but he has right now, the point that I brought up, his name, that his travel to Russia was so important in my opinion, because that shows how close is the relationship between Iran and Russia is somehow transforming, is in a way that I have never imagined it before, that they would get in this this sort of closeness. And how do you see, Scott, there was, you remember, we were talking about the conflict in Ukraine for such a long time, for more than 4 years we're talking about the conflict, even before and after the war. And we were always talking about how Russia is getting closer to China. And we see the same pattern happening here in Iran. I see that this happening. Just amazing to see, the two countries getting closer and closer. And
especially given the history.
Yeah.
Especially given the history. I mean, not just the history of, back in the Wild West of the colonial period, with Imperial Russia running rampant throughout Persia weakened, the Soviet occupation of Persia of Iran during World War II, and the effort by some in the Soviet Union at least to carve off northern Iran and make it a Soviet republic, and then there's just the overall. When I was in the Marines, I was assigned to the Rapid Deployment Force. The 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade was the Marine component of this. And in 1985, we reworked the intelligence portion of the the operation plan, for intervening in Iran, because the Soviets were going to make a move on the warm water ports of Chabahar and Bandar Abbas. And so our plan, we were going to do an amphibious operation, seize Bandar Abbas, seize Chabahar, put forces ashore, etc. And at that time, you have a counterintelligence packet, and there were lists, white lists, the good Iranians that we could bring in and use. The black list, they're the guys that we round up and put in prison. The gray guys that we have to monitor. But we were looking at Iran, as a nation that was at threat from Soviet intervention, and the Iranians were too. The Iranians were concerned about that. What would happen if the Russians made a move on the warm water ports? Up until 1978, 79, Iran was part of CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization, along with Iraq. They left Turkey. When I was in Turkey, my father was an advisor to the Turkish Air Force, and the Iranian connectivity was there. We used to have a basketball tournament in the high school, the George C. Marshall High School, and the CSTL, I forget what that stood for, but it's a tournament where we invite teams from Greece came, all American high schools. Team from Greece came, the Turkish teams came in, and we had 2 teams from Iran come in, Isfahan and Tehran. American high school teams came in 1975, 76, and 77. I think 77 they may have gotten canceled because there was stuff going on, but there was this connectivity, NATO style connectivity with Iran up until the late 70s, and the Islamic Republic brutally suppressed the communists in Iran. Was it the Tuda party? You know, I mean, hi, you're all legal. Come on out of the woodworks, registered, everything. Thank you for registering. Arrest them all and shoot them. Thank you. And the Soviets were like, you can't do that. So there's this animosity, this mistrust, this dislike. And again, if I were in the CIA, I'd be like, play up on this. You know, they don't like the Russians. Don't let them get close to the Russians. You know, don't let this happen. And yet we screwed it up. I mean, even when they had common cause, if you remember early on in the Syrian intervention for Russia, the Russians were firing air-launched cruise missiles and that were striking targets, ISIS targets inside Syria. And they got permission from the Iranians to fire them over and actually have the bombers come into Iranian airspace and release the munitions. And then they went and got permission to actually land their aircraft at an Iranian base. That was 2015 or 2016. And the Iranians said, get them the hell out of here. We don't want Russian planes on our bases. The Iranian people said, no, 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 no. And that, you know, that tells you there's deep-seated resentment out there. And yet today, just the opposite is happening. You have Iranian military officers training at Russian military academies, going to schools to learn the different trades. You have Iranian engineers, military industrial engineers, working with the Russians in various factories, learning things. You have Russians coming in and learning from the Iranians. You have military on military delegations. And the most important thing is you have a strategic security agreement that's been ratified finally by the Iranians. I mean, I loved it when everybody in June, why aren't the Russians helping? Because the Iranians never ratified the agreement. So maybe the Russians can't help because there is no legal framework to help. Now, it's not a mutual defense agreement. You know, Russia's not going to come running and go to war against the United States or Israel if they bomb. But just read between the lines. How did the Iranians shut down Starlink? By themselves? Or were they advised by people who have a history of shutting down Starlink? Is there an intelligence relationship, a security relationship? There wasn't in June because the Iranians hadn't ratified the agreement. Today there is. And I would, if I were a gambling man, I would bet a lot of money on the fact that the Russians were working with the Iranians to help them manipulate Starlink, shut down Starlink, track Starlink, collect intelligence from Starlink, the whole thing. I think the Russians are helping them in other ways too. I mean, you know, the Russians have some specialized collection capabilities. And when the United States flies a B-2 bomber, and remember, the United States has been flying B-2 bombers in the region for a long time, but they flew a strike package into Iran that was predictable because they told the Iranians all about it. And do you think the Iranians told the Russians about it? Yep. And do you think the Russians collected? Yep. And now the data that they collected on the flight profile of these aircraft, I believe, has been turned over to the Iranians, and they are developing solutions. One of the things Donald Trump has to really worry about is that if you bring B-2 bombers into Iranian airspace, you may lose a B-2 bomber because the Iranians aren't stupid. Remember, they're the ones that hijacked the Beast of Kandahar. You know, that big B-2 looking drone that used to fly out of Kandahar and was hanging out over Mashhad, you know, trying to photograph where these secret underground sites where the Iranian government hides in crises. They hijacked it. Now, I mean, we don't have to get into the specifics, but you know, the thing is controlled from the ground, taken up in the air, and then there's a period of time where the ground controllers turn it over to a satellite to controllers in Nevada who fly it. Now, it's all done with encryption, which means you have to have the NSA's up-to-date encryption package. It changes all the time. The Iranians were tracking it as it left, got that whole handover procedure down, and they were tracking it as it was passed over. And what the Iranians did is intercept the pass-off signal and take it over and fly it into Iran. And wow, they're pretty good. The Iranians are some of the smartest people in the world about these things. They've been watching the United States for a long time. Come on, America, understand. Everything we did in Iraq, everything that we did in Syria, the Iranians were watching it. Everything we did in Afghanistan, the Iranians were watching it. They know everything. Everything. And they're ready. That doesn't mean that we don't have things they don't know about. Of course we do. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a cakewalk either direction. But when you spend that much money on an airplane, I forget what the price of a B-2 is, but it's a lot. You can't afford to have one or two shot down. And my concern is that if the United States were to try to repeat that strike package, that the Iranians might be able to shoot down one or two B-2 bombers because the Russians have been helping them, because the Chinese have been helping them. There's a lot going on right now, a lot of information going on. A key aspect of survivability of these weapon systems is their stealth characteristics. But when the stealth characteristics are collected by nations capable of collecting those and solutions are derived, the Iranians are fully capable of maybe developing their own solution to the B-2 problem, but they're definitely capable of understanding the solutions given to them by the Russians and the Chinese and making the adjustments necessary or receiving specialized equipment. The Russians may have provided some specialized equipment that is capable of tracking stealth aircraft. So this is not the Iran of June of last year. I think Iran is a completely different Iran today. And a large part of that is because they now have this great relationship with Russia. And it's not just military. They're talking about politics. I think, again, I'm not Iranian, so it's, woe it be to me to say somebody made a mistake. But, Raisi, I believe, he was the president that died in the helicopter crash, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He was all in on BRICS. I mean, if you remember, the Russians were going to have the BRICS conference in Kazan. The Iranians were going to come in, and this was going to be this is like going to the casino in Vegas and bringing all the money because you're going to win. And they were ready to do that. They got shut down. The new president, the new foreign minister, they backed off. They went cool on it. And so the Kazan, BRICS summit wasn't what it could have been because Iran took a back step. And then, of course, we had the one in Brazil, which was, again, further retarded not in terms of stupid, but retarded in terms of its potential to perform. I think the Iranians are now waking up to two realities. The West isn't your friend and never will be your friend. Sorry. Two, Russia is your friend and wants to be and so do the Chinese. If the Iranians can successfully divorce themselves from the West that they've been attached to for so long and make this pivot to the East, I see nothing but good things for Iran. I see good things economically. I see good things geopolitically. But it's going to require the Iranians to change their mindset. And it's tough because you've got these huge diasporas in the West, especially the American diaspora, that retains connectivity with Iran. And you said it earlier. You talked about, the information warfare operation that's taking place, the propaganda. Now that Iran has good relations with Russia, what I would advise, maybe you could help them. There's a guy named Andrei Ilnitsky. He's a lieutenant general, was an advisor to Shoigu. And he has brought into maturity the concept of mental war. And mental war is hybrid warfare techniques used to collapse a society from within, culturally, intellectually, psychologically. And in order to do that, you have to have connectivity, a flow of data. The Iranian people need to understand this, that the CIA, that MI6 and Mossad are using your connectivity to destroy you from within. That's what they're doing. I just, again, to have fun, why don't you do a survey of all the professors in Tehran, all the University of Tehran who left when these demonstrations started, who decided they didn't want to live in Iran anymore. And ask yourself why they didn't want to live in Iran anymore. And then ask yourself why so many of their students were involved in the violence. Because the connectivity that the pro-Western elite in Iran have creates a vulnerability. I know the Iranian security service is up on this, but there was a time where Iranians could travel freely to Europe and attend conferences. And they were heavily recruited during these conferences, heavily recruited. And then they came back and they used their influence in the universities to recruit people too, people who still believed in the notion that the West is your friend. And that if you could just neutralize these conservatives, sanctions could be lifted and the economy could flourish and everything would be great. That's just going to lead to your downfall. If the Iranian government, the Iranian people allow this connectivity to take place, mental war is being waged against you on a daily basis, working to collapse you from within. You know who's not waging mental war against you? The Russians and the Chinese. The answer is so obvious what Iran needs to do here. I've used this before, and I don't mean to insult any Iranians, but I call it abused spouse syndrome. You know, the wife that gets beat by her husband, he keeps coming back because he loves me. That's Iran in the West. We beat you, and we beat you, and we beat you, and you keep coming back because you think we love you. We don't love you. We hate you. We despise you. I mean, a husband who beats his wife hates his wife, despises his wife, doesn't love his wife. The United States hates Iran. Really, a visceral hatred for Iran. We don't respect your culture. We don't respect anything, your religion, your language. We don't respect any aspect of you. We belittle you over and over again. And yet, Iranians keep coming to the West, keep turning to the West. It's abused spouse syndrome. You need to liberate yourself from that. You need to recognize that the United States is your enemy, not your friend. And that's not going to change for a very, very long time. And then you make new friends, better friends. And I think Russia and China are your better friends.
Yeah. Scott, shifting the gear a little bit to the conflict in Ukraine. Today we had the trilateral, meeting between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine on one side. On the other hand, you see Lindsey Graham coming out and asking for Tomahawk missiles to be sent to Ukraine. I don't know what he's seeking for. He wants new escalations with Russia. But do you think that we are at the end of, this continuous conflict in Ukraine? Or you see the negotiations continuing and, these endless talks that would achieve so little that cannot be considered as an end to the conflict?
Oh, the talks have achieved a lot. But you have to understand what the talks are there for. The talks aren't, again, the concept of a negotiated settlement means Russia lost the war. Everybody has to understand that when you speak of a negotiated settlement, that means the side that's losing the war is suddenly going to get things that they could only get if they won the war. So require Russia to concede things that can only be conceded if you've lost the war. Russia hasn't lost the war. Russia's winning the war. So the purpose of these negotiations right now is to underscore the reality of the necessity of Ukrainian capitulation. And every time they have a meeting, and the Ukrainians try to play the stupid card, Russia just hits them harder. And we just saw, Donald Trump was able to get the Russians to lay off energy targets for a week in hopes that the Ukrainians would understand that, wow, it's nice not to have missiles hit our energy things. We can start rebuilding, maybe get some energy flowing back in. Maybe that's what peace looks like. Maybe we want peace. And you saw that within Iran, people started saying maybe territorial concessions in exchange for peace is a good thing. But the Ukrainians weren't willing to do that. And so now the Russians smacked the living crap out of them. And this is where the negotiations are good, because negotiations prove a point. They prove a point that this war doesn't end until Russia's objectives are met. Lindsey Graham, the United States is not sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. That just isn't going to happen. Lindsey Graham can sit there, and that's like Marco Rubio saying Iran will give up its ballistic missiles. It's not going to happen. Donald Trump's not looking to escalate this conflict. And by providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, you suddenly took a situation where, the United States finally sees a light at the end of the tunnel because Russia's going to win. And you extend this war in a way that could dangerously expand into a war between the United States and Russia at a time, by the way. Today's the last day you can sleep easy because at midnight, New START treaty expires. There's no more arms control, and the United States will begin uploading its ballistic missile force with additional warheads, increasing the size of the deployed nuclear force from 1,550 to around 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Russians respond accordingly. Arms race. The nuclear nonproliferation treaty will have been proven a lie because the key aspect of the nuclear nonproliferation treaty is not only that non-nuclear weapon states don't get nuclear weapons, but the nuclear weapon states get rid of theirs. And here in the United States and Russia will be reversing course, expanding their arsenals. And other nations will say, then we have to get weapons of our own, and we're going to see the proliferation. I mean, it's going to be a completely different world, a wild, wild west. And the more nations that have nuclear weapons, the greater likelihood that nuclear weapons will be used. So, yay. And so Lindsey Graham wants to give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles at a time when there's no strategic framework of stability between Russia and the United States. Is he insane? Oh, well, the answer is yes. But fortunately, I don't think the people surrounding Donald Trump are equally insane. It's just a Lindsey Graham wet dream. It's just not going to
happen. Before wrapping up, Scott, I wanna ask you a question about Europe, because Europe is so much confused. They don't know, whenever it comes to the war in Ukraine, even in the Middle East, you've seen, Emmanuel Macron, his private messages coming out and saying that we are all in with to attack Iran, but let's ignore the case of Greenland. If you go that far, you make each and everybody your enemy. It's not just about Russia and Iran. China is on the way, Soon China would hit you. And how far they want to go in this sort of making new, enemies. These countries are not their enemies. They try to make these countries their enemies. But is there any sort of strategy in today's Europe? Is there any country in Europe to stand against these sort of stupid policies?
Well, they're all coming around. These policies didn't originate in Europe, just so everybody understands. These policies were imposed on Europe by the United States. We're the ones that came up with de-risking. De-risking is a political term for delinking. And we wanted to punish China, to weaken China, to strengthen our leverage with China over trade agreements. And so we told the Europeans, you have to de-risk. And so Ursula von der Leyen, Merz, company, everybody flew over there and tried to tell the Chinese, we're going to relook at our relationship with you. We're going to de-risk. And I remember when the Germans went over there, Merz went over there with a delegation, and VW said, are you high? Hey, Merz, you have crippled us with your stupid policies here in Europe. We don't make any money here in Europe. We don't make any money in the United States anymore. The only place we turn a profit is China. And now you want us to de-risk in China, so we make no money. And if you do that, we go away. Didn't Volkswagen just go away? So, the Europeans have dug their own grave now, but they're waking up because the wake-up call was Greenland. And they suddenly realized that the threat isn't Russia, the threat isn't China, the threat isn't Iran, the threat's the United States. And more people recognize this. And that's why you hear, people like Macron and Merz suddenly saying, we need a dialogue with Russia. Remember, the last time they wanted a dialogue with Russia is only when Russia comes crawling to them on their knees after having been militarily broken in Ukraine. Well, that didn't happen. But now they desperately realize that, as they reevaluate their relationship with the United States, they need to have stability. They can't afford to go down this route because the path of conflict with Russia was only viable in their warped, sick minds if the United States backed them up. in the United States isn't going to back them up. So I do see a change, but I also believe that we're going to continue to see revolutionary change, political change in Europe, and that these political and economic dynasties that have existed for decades are going to fall, be replaced by people who